Hey guys, welcome back to Coach Hall Writes. Today's video is specifically for AP Lang teachers. We're going to be talking about 5 different prompts from the College Board Question 2 rhetorical analysis that are very approachable for students. So I'm going to give you guys my top recommendations and also talk to you a little bit about why I like these particular prompts. Chances are, if you've been watching my channel for a while, you might have noticed that Florence Kelley is sort of my go-to when I need to come up with an example. And part of the reason that I like the Florence Kelley passage from the 2011 exam is that the text itself is relatively approachable. So the language is relatively easy for students to understand, but also her choices are relatively obvious. And even when students tend to only notice the appeals and not the choices, if you just ask them things like, okay, you said it was logical. How do you know it's logical? They can usually point to her use of facts or examples in the beginning to prove that it's logical. So I like to use this particular passage as a reminder to my students that choices create appeals. And this is also one that I think is relatively easy for them to divide. So one of the skills that my students tend to struggle with, especially when we're just starting rhetorical analysis, is that they're not used to having to analyze the passage chronologically. But if they're going to be looking for an author's line of reasoning and they're going to be trying to create their own line of reasoning, we want to really enforce this concept of analyze the passage chronologically. So I ask them, okay, how does she establish her argument? How does she develop her argument? How does she conclude her argument? So we divide it up into different sections, and that really helps. And I think the way Florence Kelley structures her argument is approachable for students. So this is one that I tend to use with my 11th graders. I actually had to use it with my 10th graders earlier this year. We had a weird scheduling snafu, and I had to teach a speech with 5 minutes notice. So I used Florence Kelley. And when the students left class, they were like, oh my gosh, this has been the best one we've read all year. So it got the stamp of approval from my 10th graders. Hopefully your students will like it as well. And if you're looking for a resource about Florence Kelley's speech, then go ahead and check out the description box below. I've got you guys covered. I also really like the Madeleine Albright speech, which was on the 2018 exam. Now, this one does seem a little bit longer than some of the other passages. However, the language is very contemporary and very approachable. I also like this prompt because a lot of my students have never actually heard a commencement speech because they're only high school students, and unless they have a relative who's graduated college, they just don't really have a reference point for it. So this is a prompt where it teaches students to slow down and to use some of the clues in the actual prompt itself. So it says commencement speech, but it also talks about how she's speaking to a graduating class. And I always tell my students, okay, not only is she speaking to a graduating class, but notice that it's an all-women's college. So female speaker speaking to a female audience. We want them to take that into consideration. Another reason why I like this particular prompt is that it's more about a message than an argument, and several of the other passages that I choose for my students tend to be more about the argument. So for the message, they're going to analyze it the same way, but they need to really isolate what her message is. They need to know that she's talking about perseverance, and they need to figure out why. Why is that message appropriate for a graduating class of students on their graduation day? It's also a really easy passage to break up into sections. So once students divide it into sections, then they need to think about the relationship between the sections. So what is the relationship between the beginning, middle, and end of her speech, and why did she structure it that way? One of the things to consider when asking yourself if a particular passage is approachable is to consider the rhetorical situation. And a eulogy as well as a commencement speech both have a designated occasion, purpose, and tone. And so in addition to teaching the Madeleine Albright prompt, I also like to teach Margaret Thatcher's prompt. And that's because this is her eulogy for Ronald Reagan. And to be honest, depending on when I teach this in the year, some students haven't actually learned about Ronald Reagan in history class yet, but that's okay. They don't need a ton of outside information in order to do well. So this really reinforces the fact that the info they need is in the prompt or in the passage. The rhetorical choices in this particular passage might not be as clear as the previous 2 that I mentioned, but I do find this passage approachable overall. I wouldn't necessarily start with this one. I would build to it, but I still consider it approachable. If you look at the release prompts from the College Board for recent years, you'll notice that for question 2, they tend to choose either a letter or a speech. However, it is important for students to be able to analyze an article as well. As far as speeches and letters go, I tend to like to have students analyze those because they tend to have a very clear rhetorical situation. That being said, the skills that they use to analyze a speech or a letter can apply to other types of writing as well. So of all the articles that the College Board has included on previous exams, my students' favorite is America Needs Its Nerds. My previous passage recommendations were all relatively contemporary, so I wanted to give you guys a recommendation that is not at all contemporary, and that is Queen Elizabeth's speech to her troops at Tilbury. So this one was on the 1992 exam, and if you can't find the original exam version, the speech itself is relatively easy to find online. Also, if you do a video search, you can find a really good video clip from a recent movie. It shows Queen Elizabeth on her horse among her troops. So that one's really good to just kind of give students the visual and to kind of set the scene for that rhetorical situation. I also wanted to give you guys a couple bonus recommendations because, as I said, in recent years, the College Board has chosen either a letter or a speech for most of their prompts. So it can be a little bit more difficult if you're looking to find an article that has a College Board prompt attached to it. So for this recommendation, it's actually from the SAT. So if you're unaware, the SAT has an optional essay that is a rhetorical analysis essay. And on the College Board's website, if you search for SAT practice prompts, you're able to find two passages. One is called Let There Be Dark. I teach this as part of my nature unit. And then the second one is called Why Literature Matters. And I include this in my education unit. So both of these are approachable, they're appropriate for exam length, and students tend to like them. If you guys have any video requests for future AP Lang Teacher Tip Tuesday videos, or just a regular video for the channel, let me know in the comments below. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on those notifications. And if we haven't already connected on social media, all my info's in the description box below. Until next time, guys, happy teaching!